as a fait accompli, a culture of non-payment. The truth is that there is in fact no such thing as non-payment. Somebody always pays. And when this money runs out, then Tshwane will be sucked into the maelstrom of state failure that characterizes so much of the rest of the country. Much like the spending of time, the allocation of budget is also an important indication of what one cares about. By far the largest portion of our capital budget for the next financial year will be spent in the poorest region of the city, the northwest. And so, for example, in other parts, in Shoshanguve, we'll be spending 42.6 million rand for roads and stormwater upgrades in Extension 19, Block FF Area 4, Block L Area 3, the construction of a 10-kilometer, 132 kV overhead power line for Block JJ, the completion and handover of 17 kilometers of roads and stormwater infrastructure in Extension 12 and 13, and a project to address flooding in Block WW. In Olivenoord-Bosch, we will invest 30.7 million rand for the construction of roads and stormwater and the construction of a bulk infrastructure pipeline of 1.5 kilometers in Extension 60. In Mamelodi, we will invest 88.6 million for water reticulation for 512 stands in Extension 6, Pomolong, sewer reticulation for 532 stands in Pomolong, the development of the Mamelodi hostels, addressing flooding backlogs, and water and sanitation installation of 984 meters of steel pipe in Extension 11. Of course, you've heard this all before. Promises made but not delivered. And that is why the implementation of the budget, tracking and monitoring of spending, will receive at least as much attention as the actual allocations themselves in this budget year. This includes the overhaul of the city's supply chain management system and its policy. That policy has now been amended, and it will broaden the market of skills and expertise available to the municipality. But it also means appointing skilled people in the right positions. This week, advertisements closed for the city's entire top management structure, the so-called Section 56 positions that report directly to the city manager. All of these positions have been vacant for a very long period of time, a cause for instability and poor supervision, but also an opportunity for a clean out and to create a new culture of professionalism and productivity at the top of the organization, which will in time and with hard, purposeful work filter through to the bottom. As a city government, our most immediate concern in the past few weeks has been the outbreak of cholera in the north of the city, claiming the lives of nearly 30 people. Our deep condolences once again go to the families of those who have succumbed to this dreadful disease. And yesterday, Temba Fosi, MMC for Utility Services, and I spent some time with a family who lost 3 of their members to cholera. In cooperation with provincial health authorities, we continue with our efforts to share information with the public about hygiene practices that will prevent the spread of cholera. Our own healthcare practitioners, together with generous support from Gift of the Givers, Doctors Without Borders, Old Mutual, Coca-Cola, SPA, Vodacom, and many others, are also working closely with provincial health authorities to ensure effective and compassionate treatment. The number of patients who report with cholera symptoms have, according to all indications, started to decline. But national, provincial, and local government are still to determine the source of the cholera. I am advised by the experts that this is no easy task. It is made more difficult by the fact that unformalized settlements without proper water and sanitation reticulation and under the authority of traditional leadership is at the center of the area of the cholera outbreak. At the outset, I asked for the city to approach the CSIR, an important partner of ours, to check our test results on the timber supply area, the part of Hammanskraal supplied by with water by the city. They have done preliminary tests which confirm our own no cholera detected in timber tap water. But the CSI report stresses that further tests have to be done, and of course we continue to cooperate with the National Institute of Communicable Diseases, the Department of Water and Sanitation, and the Department of Health. But even if tap water in Hammanskraal is not the source of the cholera, the outbreak, the loss of human life, has highlighted, like no other event before, the plight of the people of Hammanskraal, as well as the farmers and owners of small holdings in the Rooiwal area whose land and water have been polluted by the state of the wastewater treatment plant. The national searchlight has for the past few weeks been centered on 2 decades of neglect, failures, broken promises, rigged tenders, and an enormous breach of trust. This is of course not unique to Hammanskraal. Recent reports indicate that almost half of the tap water in this country is not of the standard that is required. But people rightly do not expect this to happen in the capital city of the country, a metropolitan city, especially after so many high-level promises were made, and especially after there was a change of government in 2016. For many years, the people of Hammanskraal have not had potable water, that is to say, water that is suitable for drinking and cooking. The cause is the underperformance of the Rooiwal wastewater treatment plant, which releases effluent into the Apies River that is of such poor quality that it cannot be treated according to acceptable standards at the timber purification plant. About 35% of the city's wastewater is processed at Rooiwal. In 2004 already, Tshwane's water master plan clearly warned that the plant would need scheduled upgrades in the coming years because it was nearing its capacity, becoming biologically and hydraulically overloaded. This warning was repeated in 2008, but not heeded. In 2011, the first contravention notices were issued against the city for polluting the Apies River. Stopgap disaster management measures were put in place back then, but the essential upgrades that were required to the plant were not done. In the meantime, the population of Tshwane and the volume of the wastewater grew as the quality of the infrastructure deteriorated. Had the capital upgrades at Rooiwal been done in line with the city's 2004 master plan, then the Hammanskraal water problem would have been far quicker and cheaper to solve today. But unfortunately, the line of failures and excuses did not end in 2011 or even in 2006 when the ANC was voted out of power in Tshwane. I served as a member of Solly Nsimanga's mayoral committee at the time. Solly was the first mayor, in my view, who did take serious steps to ensure Rooiwal's upgrade, although of course we are open to criticism that it took too long. But when a tender was finally awarded to do the upgrades in 2019, at that time both Solly and I had left Tshwane, as we now know, that tender was awarded to a consortium that included the company of state capture implicated Edwin Sodi. The contract failed when the project, phase 1 of the Rooiwal upgrades, was about 60% complete. When Mayor Randall Williams ordered a forensic investigation last year, it was found that the Rooiwal tender had been awarded irregularly in contravention of the law. Disciplinary steps are currently underway against several officials in the city, and I've asked the city manager to take every step possible to ensure an SIU investigation into the matter. That will, of course, in the end depend on a presidential proclamation, which we also support. But the question, of course, arises, how did this rigged tender happen under a coalition government of the DA and our partners? Edwin Sodi, of course, has well-known political connections, none of them traced to the parties that constituted the 2016 coalition in Tshwane, namely the DA, FF+, ACDP and COPE. Mayors and councillors also don't serve on tender specification, evaluation and adjudication committees. In fact, we are barred by law from even attending these meetings as observers, let alone dictating or interfering in tender decisions. As with everything in politics and government, there are simple answers and more complicated ones. The simple one is that in 2016 the coalition had failed to uncapture the city administration in Tshwane. Through cadre deployment, a policy that deliberately sets out to demolish the constitutional divide between party and state, Tshwane and its supply chain management processes had over many years been rendered defenseless against a network of corruption. No, I don't have the kind of proof of corruption that will hold up in a court of law, but then again, neither does the National Prosecuting Authority, it would seem, in respect of some of the findings at the Zondo Commission. But I can point to the prodigious number of irregular tenders that have been churned out by Tshwane's Supply Chain Management Division in the past 15 years, including the Payo Smart Meter contract of 2012, the Moipone Fleet contract of 2015, the Tshwane Broadband contract, the Glad Africa contract, and so it goes on. When the Auditor General refers to 10 billion in accumulated irregular expenditure, much of this includes money spent on contracts as far back as 2013 and whose investigations haven't been finalized in terms of Section 32 of the MFMA. To the extent that post-ANC coalitions have failed, in Gauteng in particular, we have failed to break up a network of politically affiliated officials that continue to work in government even after there has been a change in power and a change of several mayors. Prior to 2016, no distinction was drawn between party and state. Cadres were appointed in technical positions to gain control over all levers of power. This is not just a rumor or a matter of speculation. Cadre deployment was a formal policy of the governing party adopted in 1997 and executed with diligence in the years that followed. Even when the ANC lost power in the metros in 2016, deployed ANC cadres continued to work in government as if nothing had changed. Those officials are of course protected by labor law and operate on a fiction that there has always been a separation between party and state. It is time that we are honest about this fiction and honest about what it really takes to take over from a one-party state or a one-dominant party. For a dominant party to capture state institutions while it has a majority in the municipal council is relatively easy, especially if that party has supermajorities and widespread sympathy for its leadership, as was the case with the ANC for its fight against apartheid. For a divided coalition taking over from the ANC, often lacking a majority to carry out its decisions, to uncapture the state is hard. The odds of success, at least in the short term, are against you. But let me stress that none of this lets my own party and our coalition off the hook. When I speak of a long line of failures of Rooiwal and Hammanskraal water, that includes our own failure. The important lessons to draw from Hammanskraal and the failure to solve the water problem, aside from how difficult it is to change the governing culture of a country, is the following. As we now partner with the Department of Water and Sanitation, National Treasury and the TBSA, the new contract to upgrade the Rooiwal wastewater treatment plant, funded at the start by our allocation of 450 million rand in the next 3 financial years must be subject to 2 conditions. First, no contract must be awarded to any individual or company implicated in the report of the Zondo Commission into state capture. Second, all tender processes must be open, fair, and competitive. As a city, we have been honest about our own lack of capacity and by the serious work that still needs to be done to clean out our supply chain management system. But no organ of state is invulnerable to corruption and tender rigging. And so we proceed with what I hope to be, and I believe will be, a groundbreaking approach to Rooiwal, but with caution. Cautious optimism, I would say. All of these commitments and this entire vision depends on the city's ability to get a hold of our finances, to improve revenue collection, to reinstate the systems and controls which have been broken down or which have never really existed. As I said in my State of the City address, we aim to do at least 1,000 credit disconnections every week. And as we started to embark on this process, we realized to what extent the system is in fact broken, and to what extent that system will require direct intervention by the political leadership in order to mend it. Bills not properly dispatched, calculated, or reconciled, credit control contractors not paid, not supervised, all of these issues we now face. And if there is one factor that has caused Tshwane to be in a measure of financial distress, which we're open about, it is the under collection of revenue because of the breakdown of those systems and controls. So this week I have appointed the MMC for Finance, Peter Sutton, as well as the MMC for Utility Services, Temba Fosi, to lead a team in terms of Section 99 of the Municipal Systems Act to ensure that our debt collection and credit control policy is actually enforced properly, that we restore those systems and controls, that people are billed accurately, that contractors who do credit control for the city are checked, and that we don't expend public money for things that aren't in fact delivered. I must stress that all of our commitments, including those to upgrade Rooiwal, but also the long-term financial sustainability of the capital city, will depend on these efforts. If we don't get it right, then Tshwane will cycle into decline. But we are determined to fight that, to keep our original promise, to deliver clean, effective, corruption-free government, value for the money that people pay in rates and services, and to build a capital city that works for all of its people. Lastly, I'd just like to use this opportunity to pay tribute to my colleague Marlene van Staden, the mayor of the Modimolle Mokopong municipality, who passed away yesterday after a battle with cancer. Marlene exemplified the excellence, the determination under very difficult circumstances. As one of my friends said, she was made of the stuff that can turn this country around, and now she's gone. And I will continue to draw inspiration from her life and her work as we do what needs to be done here in Tshwane. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not sure if the MMC would like to say a few words before. Are you okay? All right.
He's here to help me answer some difficult questions.
Okay, all right. And
right, you're ready.
And we can hear the Mayor has a bit of a fever, so we really do appreciate you taking the time despite that. So Mayor has touched on quite a lot of issues beyond just the cholera outbreak. And I think personally I'm going to hold him accountable on what he said about the value proposition of Tshwane, that he'd like to see it as the city that works for all its people. I have noted even the budget allocations for the townships and also the gaps within the supply chain department. I mean, we all know that how Edwin Sodi continues to benefit from the tender system, despite that he was implicated in the state capture amongst the many inquiries that have been conducted. So I'll open the floor for now for questions and and please introduce yourself and the organization that you represent, and try and limit your questions to 2 per round. We'll do a couple of rounds so that the mayor is able to note your questions and respond as and when we raise questions. Okay, I'll start here in front.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Francis Ramachad from Progressive Independent News Agency, and I must just say it up front that I'm taking off the Secretariat head of the National Press Club and putting on that journalistic head. So, Executive Mayor, in your address, you also touched on the service delivery issues and so on and so on. And I do not know, you did also mention that you have been visiting some predominantly disadvantaged areas in the city. I'm not sure how far have you done that, and have you seen the state of service delivery in those villages, particularly the service delivery between the suburbs and the villages and the townships. It's double standard. It's 2 different things. I'll give an example of where I stay in the east, which is suburbs. A pothole will not last for more than 2 weeks. You'll have a pothole within a week or 2. The pothole is patched. But you go to townships, you go to Mamelodi, you'll find potholes that have been there for 5 years without even having been attended to. Look at the sporting facilities in the villages and in the rural areas. Those sporting facilities or recreational facilities are dilapidated. They are actually no longer existing. And you look at the suburbs where predominantly it's even white. It's white. You'll see the service delivery. It's different. It's completely different. Look at the areas, some of them are now even gated. They were not even gated. I'm talking about the suburbs. So why do we have these double standards? And how far are you going? I mean, how long is it going to take you to fix this double standard or difference in service delivery? And I'm glad the MMC for Utilities is here. Maybe you'll also be able to attend to that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there was a hand at the back there.
I'm Hemedi Moloi from NMA. The first question I will juggle with my fellow colleague is about the safety in the townships. What measures will you put in the townships to ensure that they are safe? And then the second question relates to the Mahalis mini water works that the president talked about.
Package plant.
Where will the budget come from?
Okay.
Do we have any other hands? Okay. Let me start at the back and then I'll come to you.
It's Memo from SABC. The mayor, there were reports about roaming tankers selling water to locals. I just want to find out if the city has established if this was indeed happening, because yesterday when we were there, residents are still adamant that the water that they're receiving from the tankers are not clean, as some actually even ended up in hospital because of consuming such water. And how many tankers currently are operating in Hammanskraal are providing clean water to the locals?
Okay.
Mayor Gadel Supporter from Kaya FM. Mayor, yesterday the president outlined that he has given you instruction to prioritize the water challenges in Hammanskraal. But from a political perspective, obviously the president also being the president of the governing party, and you outlined that some of these issues are almost, you've inherited them from the ANC tenure.
We've made our own mistakes as well.
Yes, yes. But the instruction coming from the president, how do you feel about it, in that you've highlighted that you have tried to prioritize, or you have been prioritizing it, and it's almost as if, you know, the president is telling you to do something you've already done, but also considering the fact that the president comes from the governing party, which also had its own failures during the time that they were in tenure in the Tshwane region.
Let me take those, otherwise I'm going to forget.
Okay.
All right, and then we can maybe do a second.
No, it's not just in the same.
All right,
Yeah.
okay. France, I think that no local government by itself is going to wipe out the legacy of inequality in the country. For that, we need rapid economic growth, and we need policies aimed at redress that do something different from the policies that we've had, and that requires national policy. So municipalities very much operate within a macro environment. That doesn't mean that we say we can't do anything. We have to try and spend capital budget largely in disadvantaged areas, and then try and maintain that infrastructure. And I think that was a failure in the past. Lots of infrastructure was built in the 90s, new infrastructure, even as the maintenance of existing infrastructure, including Rooiwal, for example, was neglected. I think that there is definitely a disparity in service delivery. I think I answered in my address whether I have seen. Yes, I have seen it. I've seen it. And of course, township areas in this city are also subject to massive urbanization. And in informal areas or less formal areas, it is more open to urbanization and the sprawl of settlements than in formalized areas. People who are relatively wealthy can afford private security. They can afford to close neighborhoods and fix infrastructure and cut grass and do all of these things, whereas poor communities depend on a responsible government that has the budget and that spends according to priorities. And so it is essential that to achieve social mobility, to uplift communities that have been neglected in the past, we have to have a city that works. So a city that works and the city that works for all of the people aren't two separate things. They're two sides of the same coin. If there isn't proper accountability and management, there isn't going to be that effective cross-subsidization of services to poor communities. That subsidy will be taken up by wastage, inefficiency, theft, tender rigging, and so forth. But I do think there is something to be said for a lot of better off communities doing things out of their own pocket. And I think that accounts for at least some of the disparity, although not all of it. I would, Foss, do you want to say something in regards to service delivery in the townships?
Yeah.
Before I move on to the other question.
Just to answer
Sit
Franz.
closer.
Just to quickly answer Franz, I'm a township boy myself, so I know the disparities between the two areas. But there's a certain culture also that I need to also correct, is that in the suburban area, the behavior is different, that the sporting facilities are being partnered with the communities around. And in the township areas, when you have such projects, there's quite a huge level of vandalism. That is a fact, and that is obviously due to our history. We also in this instance, as a city, need to come through to our communities and educate them about the importance of taking care of the very same infrastructure that it is there for their use and for their kids. And in instances where you would find potholes or land being invaded, is predominantly in the township area, where you don't find communities reporting these instances. I can drive now to a township at Ridgeville, Mamelodi, and all of that. You would go through normal potholes or water, huge water leaks, but they're not being reported by our communities. So we also need to educate our communities and make sure that they need to partner with us and make sure that with every service delivery issue that they have, they come to party and we can be able to solve. We are not okay so far as cash is concerned, but partnering with our communities is much more important. We can prioritize on instances where we are being pressed and be able to unlock on instances where we know that the effects go far deeper than the normal pothole or a water leak on our communities. That is one. And the second part is that we do deliver in the township areas. That I can tell you. I took a trip to Scampany, I'm thinking Hanskegana. Yes, you know that area very well. I'm telling you that from driving from Pretoria to Hammanskraal, it took me far less driving from Pretoria to the actual Temba than from Temba to Scampany, because of all the potholes and all of that. We need to partner with private companies. We need to invite, as the mayor had said in his state of the city, that we need to have everybody on board can be able to expedite things that to a great extent we might not be able to support. But the importance is that we acknowledge that there's been the differences between the township areas, and we're working hard. We've got a hands-on mayor who's available. I mean, how many times have been in the townships? So many times with him, trying to make sure that we expedite the issue of service delivery. The safety in the townships. Also, the importance is that we also, the education that I'm talking about, that we need to go, CPF structures that need to be set up to partner with the TMPD and make sure that the communities themselves, issues of vandalism into cable theft, typical issues of street light that just been vandalized, to take out copper cables out of that. These are things that need to have community available and make sure that we protect our infrastructure. No amount of security or SAPS will be able to safeguard each and every street pole, each and every kilometer of our cable. We need to have our communities coming through and assisting us. The roaming tankers in Hammanskraal, those that are charging our people, that is an act of criminality here. That is an act of criminality. The city is paying huge amounts of money to make sure that the water that is not potable there is being supplemented via the water tankers. And the people who are supposed to be then delivering that services, they're actually not doing that. They're cutting corners. These are the same companies that we're talking about, that they need to be out of the system. Because in instances like this, in all honesty, you would have private companies who would even be wanting to assist, especially those from the water tanker business. When there is cholera and when we don't even know where the source is, the importance is that the very same water companies that are doing business with us, it is incumbent on them to raise their hands and say, but now, because we've got a situation now, let's partner with you and then be able to assist us.
The other thing I want to say about water tankers, and I know we're jumping around, I'll go back to the order of the questioning in a moment. The other important point is that where instances of abuse occur, we've asked for the number plates of the trucks, because obviously we've got a record of who's contracted by the city. We've deployed some metro police to stop these water tankers and to check the number plates. Do you have a permit to sell water? If they are our trucks, we can act against them if there's a description of they were at this place at this time with that number plate. But if there are private water tankers that, for instance, deliver water to construction sites, you know that if you deliver water to a construction site, you draw from the river. And if you then use that truck and you try and sell water on the side of the road, that's a massive health hazard. And that is not something in the immediate control of the city, because those aren't necessarily our contractors, but there are people trying to make profit off of a very bad situation. And that's where we need law enforcement to come in, because they do need those permits. But let me just get back to the issue of safety. There is a trend of communities taking more responsibility for their own safety. Now, if you have resources, this is relatively easy. But what do you do if you're poor? And that's what we have to look into. So we've devised all of these innovative things, such as city improvement districts, Hatfield, Roslyn, and so forth, where people, especially businesses, pool resources and then use that to take ownership of their own streets and sidewalks and so on. And even gated communities where if you close off the community, at least you secure the street lamps from being stripped from its copper. That simple act of access control. The question is, how do we do some of those things in townships as well? Because there's no reason it shouldn't be done in townships. There's no reason there shouldn't be also an improvement district in Mamelodi, or a gated community in a place where people feel vulnerable to cable theft, to land grabs and so forth. But it is the resources, it's the money that is historically in suburbs and in business districts to fund those things. And if we can find ways to overcome that, those very solutions, those aren't just solutions for wealthy areas. It could also, or for suburbs, it could also be. And of course, we've got businesses in townships as well. It's not as if townships don't have economic activity and important stakeholders and community leaders. And the point is, we've got to plug into that, and that requires a whole lot of more work. The package plant at Magalies Water is an interim measure proposed by the Department of Water and Sanitation to relieve us of these water tankers, because as much as we try and check up on them to make sure that they extract water from the right points, that there's proper hygiene, that they don't abuse people, it is an incredibly difficult value chain for a municipality to manage, especially given, to answer your question, 44 water tankers in the formal areas of Hammanskraal, that is the areas with taps and reticulation, 53 water tankers in the informal areas of Hammanskraal. The formal areas get more frequent service than the informal areas. The informal areas across the whole city is part of our rudimentary services. But you don't want that kind of massive semi-permanent value chain that you need to control in terms of hygiene and performance. And the costs of these water tankers are exorbitant. So what the national government has proposed, Magalies Water, as you know, is an entity of national government. They've done their assessment, and the klipdrift, it's the right klipdrift, like the brandy. There's a klipdrift plant on the Magalies line, where with a few upgrades they can build a package plant as a temporary measure. So the initial timeline on that is 6 months. I have been very skeptical in making that promise, because the upgrades, to answer your question, will depend. The capital needs to come from national government and Magalies Water. We will give all the support to make that a reality, because heaven knows we want to be rid of water tankers and we want people to get clean water from their taps, but we'll have to monitor that very carefully, and the technical details of this package plant still need to be shared. It's very much at a conceptual level, although the commitment was, Forsi, you can confirm, the commitment was that it is possible to do that, yes, to serve those communities, and then you cut out the water tankers as that semi-permanent water delivery mechanism. I think we've answered the questions on the water tankers and the opportunists.
Yes, I think that was from my colleague. Mine was around the president's instruction.
Yes, oh yes, of course. Let me just, before I move on, we did answer the water tanker question, I hope. All right. Katlego, the instruction from the president, I mean, we are an autonomous sphere of government. We don't instruct each other. We try and cooperate with each other to solve policy issues. What happened was that before this outbreak of cholera and before the national searchlight, I was in Cape Town for a session of National Treasury City Support Network that dealt with sanitation. That was the focus of the workshop. And I heard that the Minister of Water was going to be there. By all indications, he is a reasonable person, somebody who one can talk to. And I said, please secure me an audience with the minister. We met 15 minutes. Forsi, you were also in that meeting. Johan Mettler, the city manager, was there. And I said to him, all of the failures, all of the litigation, all of the fights between Tshwane and Water Affairs must now come to an end. We admit that we have failed. Several water ministers have made wild promises that weren't delivered. Regardless of the situation, the people of Hammanskraal don't have quality water, and we have to cooperate in order to fix that. Even if it means giving away Rooiwal to national government with the understanding that they would bring the capital, because we can't just give it away without the commitment to upgrade the facility. That facility needs about 4 billion of upgrades, or some other partnership. And I found the minister to be supportive, collegial. He's got criticism of Tshwane, of course, but at every step, we've worked together closely, as have the technical teams, and I really think that there's an opportunity for a breakthrough. So I'm cautiously optimistic about the plan that has been set out. The President was briefed on the situation when I've had far more interactions with the Minister of Water than the President, and I'm sure that the Minister has the President's backing. So, the President made remarks. I think the fact that the President has also said yesterday, national government from his side apologized for the situation. I think that confirms that many mistakes were made by many people, and the crucial question is now, how do we take responsibility for a solution? It's very tempting to get into a finger pointing and blaming each other, but that's not going to give us the solution in this instance.
Okay, May, I've just had some comments here on Twitter saying that in light of what you've shared now, that there's a bit of cooperation in trying to find solutions to the Hammanskraal challenges. What is your view on business continuity? Is there business continuity, considering that there was a change of mayors and administration in the city of Tshwane, which has to some extent also led to the delay? But also, is there collaboration, not only at Tshwane, but given that the issues of water sanitation as well touch on a national sphere?
So I think that will depend on two issues. The first is, how do we structure this partnership to upgrade Rooiwal? And just to run through the essentials of that, the city of Tshwane is going to contribute 450 million rand in the next 3 financial years, 150 million rand in the next, the one that starts on the 1st of July, so broken up into 3 parts. That will enable us to do the first phase of the upgrades at Rooiwal without any additional funding. But a crucial part of that is that the DBSA will be our implementing agent. So they've got the expertise, they've got a dedicated infrastructure unit that will overcome some of the internal obstructions that we have in Tshwane, and I've been very candid about our rotten supply chain management system, obviously subject to the caveat that any organ of state, including the DBSA, is also vulnerable. So we're going to have very clear agreement. And once we have that agreement, we've got all of the details ready, that should survive a change of mayor or a change of minister. I'm not saying that it will, but it should. And the partnership between National Treasury, DBSA, Water and Sanitation and Tshwane is the most credible solution that we've had up until now, and I think it is encouraging. People should take encouragement from the fact that me and the minister aren't pointing fingers at each other or chirping or doing all of the other things that people do when nobody wants to take responsibility for a situation. So hopefully our partnership and the deal that we will structure and finalize will survive political instability. And I've also had discussions with various opposition leaders in the Municipal Council, all of whom have indicated support for this. It will in the end depend on whether we can keep the public attention and the scrutiny on this project. Break down the milestones, communicate to the public how far we are. You as the media also have a critical role in doing the background searches into the people that win these tenders, to check and to hold us to account to the milestones and so forth. So I'm, again, cautiously optimistic that this can be done, but 100 things can still go wrong. And the important point is that here you've got people who've taken responsibility for a solution.
Thank you. Do we still have any more questions from the floor? Okay, we'll go to that.
Mayor Gabriel Support again from Kai FM. Mayor, in terms of the source of the cholera outbreak, you have outlined the difficulty in determining it. A colleague of mine from the Sowetan did an extensive piece on that bacteria can live in water, but in different parts of it, and this is scientifically why it's difficult to determine where the source is. In your discussions with the research institutes who are trying to test